So
No one prompted her?
no one prompted her. She's just talking. This is very typical of children this age. It's kind of like, try this way. She's just guiding. The idea is she's guiding her own drawing, you know, kind of thinking, this one's pink, you know, maybe this one should be blue. And she's just kind of talking while she's drawing, but it doesn't really make any sense because she's leaving a few words out. She's only saying the words she needs to hear. And while an adult there is saying, and I find I do this a lot with my younger daughter, the when I'm really not listening to her. She's talking off the word sometimes. But a lot of times, children don't really need us to respond. They just want to exist. They want assertions that they do exist. In fact, I find adults are this way sometimes too. They just want to know that somebody's listening, at least partly. But what we see in this is there's just sort of random words, what seems like to us to random words. But it seems to serve some function for the child. It's argued that it's very much like we are doing silently. So I will put that link on in case you want to look at it again. I'll post it on Blackboard. Now, as I mentioned, there is a lot of work nowadays in expanding Vygotsky's work. So I've been really studying the last couple of years Engström's work. I'm kind of doing it backwards by reading some of his most recent stuff. I'm going to have to go read that book he wrote in the 80s before I'm going to really totally understand it. But he has introduced this activity triangle. It is complicated, and I'm not expecting you to get, I'm still figuring it out, okay? But the point is this, and one piece of it did start with Vygotsky. Except Vygotsky had the subject here, the person. This would be a response. So remember, in behaviorism, we talk about stimulus response, right? There's the little bell, and the dog starts drooling. Everybody remember that? So as a stimulus response, Vygotsky's arguing that words or language becomes a tool for mediating that relationship. So that we may, at some point in our lives, have been conditioned very similarly. In high school, the bell rings. It's lunchtime. You start getting hungry. But if the bell goes off at a weird time, you're going to think to yourself, this is not the time. This is not really lunchtime. I don't know why the bell is going off. So I know I'm not going to go have lunch now. And that thought process mediates the effect of the bell so that your stomach doesn't start growling right away. Although sometimes it will anyway. You at least don't get up and go to the lunchroom. So the point is that our language can really mediate that relationship. And I have been doing a lot of work on how that is what allows agency in our behavior. That because no longer do we simply respond to the environment, we say, do I want to respond to the environment? And language here is really becoming a tool for thinking about that. So actually, therapists will use this quite often. And in fact, you see it in daycare centers also. We start with the daycare centers. They say use your words. They start trying to get children to say, I'm angry. Because if you can get that child to say, I'm angry at you, they're much less likely to go across the room and smack the person they're angry at. It is natural for kids to just smack another kid, or even mom or dad, at this point, because they don't have that sort of self-control. But by learning to say, I'm angry, they're no longer going to do it. With adults who have anger management problems, it's more or less the same process we have to go through. That those adults have to learn to say, I am really angry, and to analyze their own emotions so that they can get control over them. Because by speaking it, no longer do you have that impulse, at least as strong, to go and smack the person. The same thing with somebody who's depressed. Often depression is thought of as anger turned inward, turned against yourself. So for a lot of people, it may be a question of realizing that, no, I don't hate myself. I'm just really pissed off at that person. And then they don't have to do anything. To some extent, just knowing that they're really angry about the situation they're in, or that person for doing that crappy thing, relieves some of the depression. Now, at some point, often some sort of actions to get out of that terrible situation are helpful. But sometimes just not being able to put a word to the feeling can give you control over it and make it not dominate you. So that is really the power of language as a tool. Engström's model does much more than that, though. One of the key things here is that when we do things, it's because there's something we want to get, an object. There's the object of our desire, or the outcome that we're trying to get. So you are in school to some extent because you want to graduate and get that degree, and eventually to get a job, or a better job. That is the basic object of being in college, is to graduate. I would argue that there's some conflict in there, because for some people, you actually want to become educated, to become a better person. And for most people, it's a bit of both, and there may be other reasons too. To get the respect of your family, there's all kinds of things we could talk about as being the object. Officially, though, in a capitalistic society, the object is to graduate. There's very little emphasis on doing it for yourself because you want to know more about the world. And I think this is one of the biggest problems, and Engström talks about this as the fundamental contradiction in capitalism. So Marx comes back in here, we don't lose Marx, that we are pushed between what we have to do so that we can survive, so we can get better jobs, and what we want to do for ourselves. So this is called exchange value versus use value. You want that piece of paper so you can get a job, but you also want what comes with it, to be a better person. Or 100 other things that you might want along with that. But we're pushed, because of the structure of our society, to be focused on being able to get a job. It's always about the job. And sometimes I get very frustrated, and I do it. I'm like, you should go to the talk today because you can get extra credit. That's not really why I want you to go, though. I want you to go because it's going to be a great talk. But we all emphasize that extrinsic value, because that's what society tells us matters most. So that's an important part of Engström's model here. So in my research, I'm looking at college as the activity system. There's a whole bunch of different tools that we use to help us through this. So computers, textbooks, chairs, projectors, all of these are various tools that we use. But the activity system is much bigger than that. And different people can focus on different parts of the triangle, but there's a community that you're involved in also. And I would argue that to some extent that community can be a tool to help you achieve that objective, but sometimes it also interferes with your ability to get there. Each community has a set of rules. I'm the professor here, so I get to do most of the talking. I always want you guys to do more talking, but right now is a particularly lecture-heavy moment. You'll get to talk more later. And the rules are set up. I have to take attendance. I will tell you that I consciously try to de-emphasize power, because I think authority can do some damage. But in the end, I'm the one who gives you the grade. And I can't change that. So I always have more power at that level.
There are two other distinctions we ought to consider for a moment. One is the distinction between spontaneous and scientific or academic concepts. Spontaneous concepts, in the end, are not as developed as those scientific or academic concepts. We don't necessarily make them as abstract. They tend to be more concrete. It is specifically schooling that really changes us to and enables us to make those abstract concepts. So when we come back next class, we're going to talk more about concept development, and I think that will become clearer. The other issue to consider is the distinction between natural versus cultural lines of development. These are very similar to the notion of spontaneous versus scientific concepts, and they are very intertwined and inseparable. The key thing is this, that as a child grows, something like their memory is going to get better without anything. Of course, there is no such thing as without anything, because a child's going to die if you leave them alone. However, we can theoretically make this distinction that if you don't do anything, you never talk to the child, that child's memory is still going to get better. However, culture from day one begins to impact that child and can make it makes an enormous difference as we, everything from where they sleep and so forth. But as we were talking about already with information processing, there's various strategies that help us to remember better. We remember things collectively. We have tricks to help us remember, whether it's tying a string around our finger or writing it down. These cultural ways extend our natural memory. The point is that these become so intertwined that we can no longer separate what's natural and what's cultural. And we will come back to this next class and deepen our understanding of that a little bit, I hope. Thank you.